Good evening, Professor York here again. This is a quick recap and debrief on Cleopatra. I'll look at some of the performance-related issues, as well as I will look at some case insights that perhaps you may not have fully picked up, but I want to reinforce some key things that will help you moving forward as you move into your client assignments. Okay, we talked about the bottom four areas, art of client service, and previously in two videos, client and scope, and then the assignment we did this afternoon or this morning. Today we're going to touch a little bit on recap and case this evening. So first and foremost is, okay, so what did you guys do well? What did we improve upon? I think the PowerPoints were so much better, so I'm really impressed with that. Number two is that I think the content was getting better. Those two sections were really solid. You're in the content, the setup, the argument points, the support, I will say is still mixed, and I'll come back to that. Strategy pieces were good, and the wrap up, for the most part, was solid. So what made the difference? And I think that a number of you recognize, because I made you go back and redo section 5, which was, and I'll be very clear, if you read this, and I brought this to my wife, and I said, what does that say? Questions to address in appendix. So that means you need to address these questions in the appendix. It needs to be clear and crystal so that I can be able to follow the orgy of points. I found during the presentations that I had to search in the front end and even in the back end to be able to find points for some teams. The teams that performed the strongest were very clear and crisp in terms of, one, being able to make sure there was a slide per each question, or a designated section per slide per each question. Number two, they answered the questions completely. And number three is that they provided data. So why is this important? I put this here because you may think it's structured, but at the end of the day, sometimes you have assignments that are put forth by management that you need to define in a specific way, such as a marketing plan. And if you don't do it in a specific way, such as if you worked at Merck and you didn't, you might lose the opportunity to get investment into your business. You may have RFPs that have certain requirements. USAID, for instance, has a grant process. I work with a company down in Santiago, and they didn't address everything clearly and completely. They lost a lot of money as a result of that. So the point is to pay attention to instructions, because if you pay attention to instruction and form, then you'll be more successful. Just as an aside, if you do a patent application, the first thing that is looked at is form. So at the end of the day is always read your questions, and the teams that read those questions and did those questions first, brought them back in the presentation, performed better. All right, so point losers. We talked about story and individual coaching sessions. I'll talk about it in a few minutes a little deeper. The decks were not locked. We saw some messy decks that spilled over. Presentation. I think the presentation still needs some improvement. That's the point of this class. Okay, it's a safe place to practice. Okay, I want to make sure that your openings are strong and that you're not reading notes. When you come to content, okay, make sure you have good support to your arguments. Those who bring strongest support win the arguments, or win the ability to influence the audience. Strategy was missing in terms of push and pull in the deck. This case was about push and pull. Mitigations. I found that there were several cases where mitigations were not specific in terms of actions. Implementation was weak again in terms of being able to have responsible and dates. Think about implementation as an action plan. This will be very critical moving forward in your consulting engagements, because you need to have a time and event schedule. Keep yourself tracking to who's responsible for what deliverable and at what time. And then on one occasion, I found a wrap-up that was a little confusing because they were putting implementation plan with wrap-up. Wrap-up should be singular and to the point. Section 5, as I mentioned beforehand, not answered completely. And then there were some answers that didn't have full detail, and there was some hedging. What I mean is, the question begged for a yes-no, and I didn't get a yes-no answer, and with backup accordingly. And not necessarily using strategy tools. Most notably is positioning statement. So, learning experience. Read and follow the rubric. Think about the story. Back up your points. Practice your presentations, especially up front. Know it cold. Don't read your stuff. It just takes away. I know you're practicing and you want to be. Think about what the main point of the slide and build off that. Don't be defensive in the Q&A. I've run into that 1 or 2 times. What it does is it takes away from the effectiveness of presentation. In fact, a Harvard Business Review article that highlighted a survey of venture capitalists said, what was the #1 reason for selecting a particular company? And what they said was the coachability. It's how they interacted, how they responded to tough questions. If you get defensive, what happens is a coach says, I can't work with these people, I don't want to. So you need to ask yourself the question, do I want to be coachable? Because as you are going to move through your career, senior managers are going to ask that question. If you turn defensive, then what will happen is that they will pass you over. And then last but not least is, can you tie this into relevant strategy? This is a very, very key. This course is about strategy and not tactics. So, one of the issues that popped up, and it was a major point loser, was storyline. Storyline means that you start in the beginning with a story, and you take it throughout your deck. This is the highlight we talk about, and we see in TED Talks. So, here's a few different themes that I just sort of brainstormed as I looked at this deck. You know, we could have, and I'll use the example of Team 1, which had the Path to Beauty, which I thought was a good example. But you could have, and I use commonly, a storyline which is called Path to Value. And the Path to Value allows us to think about how we're going to create value for that particular audience. If you have a complex problem and you need to put things together, you can talk about connecting the dots or being able to talk about a roadmap or the journey. Very, very similar themes here. Or like in this case with Cleopatra, we could use the whole theme about lost in the woods and how do we find ourselves home. Likewise, we can use the road to recovery or honing in the target. And then last but not least is the classic, which is boy meets girl scenario, where we do have a situation where there's a love story and a complication, and ultimately the boy finds a way to win the girl's heart back. So, going forward, always think about a story, not at the beginning and the end, but throughout. Tie a theme through your deck, not just in terms of look, but icons and headers, and the headers can be in terms of parts of your story, right there at the top or at the bottom. It's there. So on to our beautiful Cleopatra. Or I like to say Cleo because my team, when we worked on this, renamed her as Cleo. We wanted to be more chic and be more in tune with the Quebecois, and particularly folks in Montreal, because I know some people in Montreal. That just how they look at things are very, very different from those in those individuals in Paris. So, what did a Colgate Palmolive do in Quebec? And I am amazed because CP is a great consumer marketing products company. But what they did was they fell in a trap that we find that many, many global marketing organizations do. So the question ends up being, do you aim, get ready, you aim and you fire, or do you do the other thing, just fire and then you aim? Okay, so that's a big question. So what did Cleopatra do? They aimed and fired, or fired and aimed? Well, I think they did the second versus the first. So they missed the mark as a result. And we have this construct called the marketing concept process. So I'm bringing a new concept to you to help elaborate, and this is a new pearl. So many ways businesses have a business mission. Okay, why they exist. And then they have the environmental analysis. You see this in the situation analysis and with a SWOT analysis. Then we have objective setting or goal formulation, as we talked about in the brand plan. And then we have strategy formulation and program formulation, which is really your tactical set. So we talked about tactics. And then you implement your tactics. And then what you have is metrics to be able to do. So what happened? Well, first and foremost is the brand mission was not clear for Quebec. Okay? We were trying to do a cut and paste. There, if you look at a case, there was no mission or SWOT to be performed for launch. Their testing, in terms of the market research, was done in Toronto. The market was not segmented properly in scare care to evaluate the segment and how Dove and Camay were performing. So there was really not really good segmentation work that was done. The forecast was top down. This happens a lot in many companies, and so then managers in the middle are scrambling to try to fit to top-down expectations. They needed to consider the relative segments of skincare, and they needed to think about revenue drivers. And this is very key, as we talked about in terms of objective setting. Okay? They pulled tactics from previous launch from France. Okay? And we're not sure if those meshed with the Quebecois marketplace. There was strong advertising to support brand awareness. That's where I got 73%. But they ignored the channel. They ignored pricing. So these are issues that could have been, as I point out, could have been supported with coupons versus off-invoice. And then what they did is they did pull across France without considering, they did not consider what they needed to gain share against the market leader. So in other words, a positioning statement. So you need to think about PCME as a result, and particularly benefits. If you remember, in terms of the messaging that was there, it was feature-oriented. They ignored the retail. So they ignored the retail wholesale side, which was basically, they ignored the push. The promotion was a heavy pull, and the pricing strategy was without a formal pricing model. They should have done a price benefit model, but there are other testing models that they should have done. They should have done a co-joint elasticity or value models, and we talked about the value model, but those are things that should have been done to determine the price. Okay? While they had strong launch with sales and they did sampling, okay, and sweepstakes, they had poor channel management, and that was something that killed them at the end. And then I think at the end, they did have a good post hoc to assess launch issues, awareness, and brands. But they still could have done a deeper look into brand personality, channel, and customer experience. So in the snapshot, I know you hate this slide because it is busy, but it puts in one slide in terms of all the key issues. By the way, to make the slide more appealing, you can be able to use animations. All right, here's a simple slide that I know you guys will probably like a little bit more because it's simple and sweet and gets to the point about Lost in the Woods, which I think Team 7 was trying to work with. It's a concept that I shared with them, which is we're lost in the woods. Okay? I remember this I would go out when I was in high school with a friend of mine. His name was Terry O'Brien, and we would go in the New Jersey winters, and we'd go for long Saturday afternoon hikes in the woods, actually on John Dos Passos property. Is a great novelist who had a wide expanse of property, and easily we could get lost in these woods, especially when we went to twilight and we got into conditions just like this. We didn't know our path home, so we needed to make sure that we had a strategy to get path home, and we understood that. If not, we could really be in a lot of trouble. Unfortunately, Colgate-Palmolive is in a very similar situation. All right, so imagine yourself and being in Steve Boyd's position. He's lost in the woods. He's stuck there like my friend Terry and I. Actually, we never got lost in the woods. We always found a way, and we always had a dog who knew how to get home. So that was our mitigation for our risk and mitigation plan. But Steve has a little problem, has a little headache. Steve has 3 options. So the question that was posed in this case that I put forth, and I did do a deduction of a 1/4 point, was when you answer the question, Did you look at the question, the options that were there, very clearly put forth in the case? Retreat, or continue and tweak, or alter the strategy and the product itself. Okay? So in many ways, if you look at it, there's a 2x2 that we can think about in terms of a strategy standpoint. We can hold product, we can build the product, we can harvest, or we can divest. And again, that's based on market as well as market share. So market growth and market share are big things that are there. So you need to think about these type of things as you go forward. Okay? So in this case, do we divest from this business, or do we build this business, or do we just hold this business with a few tweaks? But I think these are the two big things that we have to think about, especially that we have a product very early in the life cycle. So what Steve really needed to do was aim, and the global people should have aimed versus doing cut and paste. So remember these questions that we had? I put them there for a reason. I put them there because my colleague Shannon Threlkeld, who taught us and used this case in my marketing class when I was in business school, had shared these same exact questions. This was the framework for basically our analysis. And what is very good is that these questions provide the basis for what we call opportunity analysis. Do we play in this market? Can we play in this market? Can we get return in this market? Or should we bail out of the market? So if you go back to the previous slide that we had here, do we harvest? Do we divest? Do we build? Do we grow? So those are the questions that sometimes you have to think about when you ask these questions. So the first question is, can the benefits involved with the opportunity be articulated convincingly to define target market? What do we mean by that? Well, one key point that some teams got, but not all teams, was the benefit issue. One of the things I like to do is make sure we have a very clear positioning statement. Position for which customer, what's the job to do, against who's the competition, in this case being Dove, and then how are you different? And different not just being feature, which is, but why? What is your story? Why? And what are the benefits at the end of the day? Because customers buy with benefit. And then if yes or no, how, back it up. And then in essence is then what does Colgate-Palmolive do? So, hint, hint, positioning statement, market research, understand your benefit mix, build your concept, build your messaging around it. Okay, 2, target market, consumer. What is the persona? Okay, we're talking about that 35 to 45, losing your elasticity, you're getting exposed to the cold and the dry. We're thinking about people, our icons being people like Celine Dion. Okay, can we locate and reach these people with cost-effective media and trade channels? So this is tricky. We're talking media, which would be promotional. Okay, so we're talking about print, social, digital, TV, radio. So that's something we have to think about. What makes it? Would this be a great soap opera product that should be promoted on soap opera on TV? Or is there another type of channel or show or other delivery system? Should this be dropped into 4 seasons? Trade channels. What are the places you want to sell it at? What are the outlets that are there? Okay, those are the 2 questions. So again, the question is yes, no, how. So when I ask these questions is not just put an opinion, but put some depth behind it. Argue your point, support your point. Look, I'm trying to get you into a habit that you will use for the rest of your life in your corporate life. You need to justify your position. Okay? If you want to be taken seriously, you have to do that. So then the question is, what is the importance of the channel? Okay? So we talked about the target market in terms of the customer. Now we're getting into the channel in this case. Who is the archetype of the customer in the channel? Again, archetype. Where we talked about Celine Dion, maybe it's the retailer. So retailer, how about Mr. Whipple from Charmin? Okay? He or she is going to be key in the channel in terms of retail side. What are their motivators? They want to make money, or they want to turn inventory. Why? They have a business to run. They can't just sit with inventory on their shelves. Okay? So what should Colgate-Palmolive do? It's pretty simple. Help them solve their business need problems. Help them be able to develop programs that can make sure that product flies off the shelf and they make a reasonable margin. Make sure it's placed and pay them for that placement. Pay them for end caps. Pay them for volume incentives. Pay them to be a partner. Okay? None of this off invoice. You get lazy with off invoice, and the expectation is you'll come back again next year. What all that does is create the slippery slope with discounting. Does Colgate-Palmolive possess or have access to the critical capabilities and resources needed to deliver the customer benefits? So again, I ask that question, yes or no. This is a very straightforward question, and some of these are yes or no. The best way of answering a lot of these questions from an executive level would be, yes, this is what it is. Be definitive, upfront, in the face, okay, and these are the 3 reasons why. Well, think about it. Colgate-Palmolive is a multinational global company that has tremendous resources, $1 billion of assets that exist. Okay, they probably have a North American division. They do in the U.S., but they probably have a strong Canadian division. And in addition to the marketing side, they probably have a very strong sales side, which probably involves trade relationships. Okay, so they have the personnel. The resources, definitely they have the resources in terms of capital that's there in the organization. They also have products. Remember, they talked about multiple products which you can be brought into deals that you can leverage off of as well with the channel. Okay, so yes or no. If you answer either, then you need to say, what are the gaps? And how do you remedy? I think one of the things that was a gap was that they may not have had an agency that had more insight to the Quebecois population. Again, what do you recommend and why? Themes are very simple here. Give me answers, support your answers. These are, you know what? You're going to be taken seriously on the corporate level. You need to get into this habit. And if you do that, you will be very successful and you'll have a fast track. All right? Can Colgate-Palmolive deliver the benefits better than actual potential competitors? Yes or no? Okay? Again, how? You start with the positioning statement. Okay? Then you use PCME. Then you get into what is your tactical plan. And I think a lot of you defaulted to tactics. And then the financial rate of return. Okay, there was one or two teams that actually gave me basically some outputs from the financial analysis that was in the case. Okay, but remember, I gave you an exercise of purchase driver scorecard. Okay, which tied to an income statement. All right, ultimately, when these decisions are made on the corporate level, we're doing NPV or net present value analysis or in IRR analysis. Okay, internal rate of return, to make sure we know that we have a good return on our investment. So again, what would you recommend and why? Those who gave me more detailed answers and gave me at least a spreadsheet ended up scoring higher. So as we look at this case, we have to look at some market questions. The fundamental question is, do we want to play in this market? We need to think about, as we talked about previously, how large is this market? Okay, it's a good size market if I remember. It's close to 30%, I think, is a good size for Canada that is there. The other question that does raise a concern is the growth in the market, or the CAGR. Do we have an accelerated growth, or are we flat? I think we are semi-flat, which tends to be that we lead to what we call a red ocean marketplace, where now we're fighting for market share with multiple competitors. So now we're in the five forces phase. So the question ends up being, as Michael Porter talks about, is how do you segment? So we talked about segmentation strategy, and usually a narrow market scope means that you have to segment by targeting an individual customer segment, or a segment of the soap market. So in the soap market, you can have utility, you could have basically refresh, you could have the third being basically that health, beauty, skincare type of marketplace. But there's a fourth marketplace, and one of the teams identified, what if we made this a beauty bar? Can we create this as more of a cosmetic line? Can we do something that goes beyond the box that basically has, where we're not a bunch of piranhas fighting over a piece of bait, but actually, on the other hand, have a blue ocean that we can be able to create and expand that marketplace? Such as what we saw with Yellowtail, what they did in the wine market. The second issue that we do, and we talked about it in class today, is what we call the 2x2 relative to globalization and multinational strategy. Many corporations will take what we call a globalization strategy. They have a global brand, they have a global campaign, they have a global look. They basically want to rubber stamp it throughout the world. It's very efficient, keeps things consistent, a lot of great arguments. The problem in this case, as Colgate-Palmolive tried to do that, thinking because of the commonality of language, that it would work. Okay? That's what Colgate-Palmolive wanted to do for Cleopatra. Is a straight extension. Same promotion, okay? Same product. All right? That's the promotional strategy. But then we have product adaptation. You could tweak on a global play in terms of having a product adaptation. Or you can do a differential in terms of changing your promotional adaptation or going a little further in terms of the product adaptation. That's what Colgate-Palmolive did in terms of what we propose, is that they should have taken Quebec at least with the promotional adaptation. Furthermore, is they may have thought about a product adaptation. And the product adaptation could have been in terms of change in terms of the amount of perfume, but also even some of the packaging that could have been more Quebecois friendly. It's not about cut and paste. So, Steve's options. Bail, tweak, or change. Well, if you pick tweak or change, or you change, you have strategy, product, or both, as we talked about beforehand. Okay, so those are the two things that most people chose with tweak or change. So this is back from our analysis we did at Kelly. And what we did was we pulled data from there looking at the three market segments: skincare, refreshment, and utility. So you always segment your market. That is what Michael Porter talks about. So we segment a size, growth, and number of competitors. And as you remember from previous lecture, what we ended up doing was then we put together some elements in terms of attractiveness, key criteria, potential for growth, and features that drive attractiveness, which drove the ultimate decision to go into skincare marketplace. Notice on the bottom here, I try to give anchors. So this might be a good tool as you walk through your presentations to anchor to certain sections. So we're talking about segment at this point. Okay, we're going to segment into the second thing in the case, which is once we have a segment, we need to think about the customer archetype, because they make up that segment and we're a target within there. So we have two, in this case, archetypes. Most people identified one, which was the target customer, and there's a natural default that is there. The problem is we haven't identified who the retailer is and that the customer. Oops, we missed that one. But we got Celine Dion, especially when we look at Team 1. But I think Team 6 and a few other teams we're getting at. I think that Maple, in terms of one of the other teams, was another archetype that was there. But you need to have a key, clear customer. And Celine, or you might even think Alanis Morissette now today versus back in maybe 10 or 15 years ago might tie into that. They have money, they like glamour, they're beautiful people, they're just beautiful, and they're people that a lot of people aspire to. This is beauty in your 40s and 50s. And guess what? There are a lot of women, when they reach that age, want to remain beautiful. Whether it is because they are in the entertainment business, they're in the media business, or in just general business, they want to look their best, feel their best. This is the reason why Botox sells a lot of money and why we have a lot of dermal fillers. That's why we have a huge cosmetic industry, a cosmetic industry, as well as a cosmetic surgery industry. So, now we talked about segment, architect, now we get to branding. This is interesting because remember the concept of PCME, okay? Position, concept, message, execution. Well, I threw a few pieces to think about. First of all is in your positioning, this is the high-end positioning. Yes, it is. I am worth it. And that's what you have to think about with this customer. Yes, I am worth it. L'Oreal used this for their hair care, okay? Team 2 talked about the beauty bar. The bottom line is, hello, beautiful, as Madison Reed uses in their campaign when they sell high-end, at-home, salon quality hair coloring. Okay? Other things to think about is it's Cleo. Okay? So, and then Lebe, beauty et tout, which is the beauty within you. So you need to think about these concepts that are there that you want to bring from the core positioning. High-end, beauty bar concept. Hello, beautiful is your message that ties back to there. And says Cleo and a little bit, the beauty within, again, are key messages that can reinforce what this whole thing is, the concept. This bar is basically your path to beauty. And your execution being, in terms of your media, your ad copy, your packaging should be able to follow through this. And remember, you're high end, and damn, you're worth it. So one of the things I talked about a positioning statement, I looked through some of the positioning statement written up from some of the teams, but let me give you sort of a very straightforward tool that's there. University selling proposition, and I talked about it in class. So for customers who have a particular problem or the job to do, our product, okay, that provides this capability is unlike. So we're talking about the point of differentiation versus reference. This is being Dove. Our product solution, which causes the key point of competitive differentiation. Here is our example here from the case. Cleopatra, okay? Brand name and messages that pull through the positioning. Cleopatra, Cleo. We are playing with Cleo as a little bit more avant-garde, maybe a little more North American than what we have in France. Is a beauty bar. Hello, number 2 team, you dialed it in, which enhances a woman's beauty every day by providing smooth and sensual skin. Okay, your product claims are benefits. These are not features, unlike the ad copy we saw in the case. Tagline to this would be Cleopatra, for a more beautiful, sensual you every day. We want to celebrate you. I'm talking to that individual who feels like they aren't worth it anymore. No, you are worth it. And you should spend the money to make sure that you maintain that youth and vitality and your ability to celebrate it. Okay? You are different, Cleopatra, in terms of who you are to Dove, Caress, and Palmolive. Why? Because it enhances your self-image, confidence, and attractiveness to the opposite sex. Again, because you are worth it. Okay? The supportive messages then get into the creaminess, the fragrance, and but the bottom line is, because beauty, confidence, and sensuality should be every day and not just for special occasions. Make it an attitude, make it a feeling, make it a part of what your brand is, and speak to that customer. So that's what pulling that positioning statement is all about. And you need to think about it not being feature-oriented. So here's from the case. Cleopatra, you look at that, rich is clean, sensual is perfect. This is features. So many products and entrepreneurs fall into this trap. Dove, softer, smoother skin. Ooh, little benefit here. Try it for 7 days. We have a call to action. So remember the Bain triangle. Functional, emotional, life-changing, and social impact. Okay, changes, but these are benefits. Think about the job to do, the pain that you're trying to get rid of, or the gain you're trying to create. In this case, what we're trying to do is create a gain, making you more beautiful, or taking away the pain in terms of the issues that you might have in your self-confidence because you have wrinkles. And you need to speak in the language of the customer. Yes, speak Quebecois. Okay. Do you speak the customer? Yes, you are beautiful. Okay. I am worth it. Are you Quebecois? You know, you need to be, and this is where Colgate-Palmolive fell short. And that's why I think Team 1 was right on the right track there. So, remember the magic triangle we have from the art of client service. It applies to this case. You have a brand has to fulfill that promise, so you have trust. But it's that great work that creates trust. But you have to have the relationship with the customer. So, I bring this back to you because at the end of the day, guess what? At the end of the day, what we see as in advertising as an agency, which is your brand, ties directly to your branding as a product. Wow. Don't forget the promise. We don't break promises. We fulfill them because we want to keep trust and we want to keep the relationship. Another point that I would point out here, and this is point number 3, if you've been tracking, is the whole thing about wholesalers versus retailers, distribution. Some people talk about packaging and distribution, yada yada, but the reality, distribution is your channels and moving a product from the manufacturer over to the retailer, and the retailer being able to move it into the making it available to the customer. If you don't have it available, then what happens is the customer can't find it, they get frustrated, and they write you off. So you have to have it if you're going to do a good pull campaign to complement your push. If not, what happens is you have the same situations, back orders. But as you do and you optimize your supply chain going from yourself ultimately to the consumer, okay, especially from manufacturer distribution to retail out to consumer, is while there's a cash flow that comes back, there's a flow of information that's back and forth that's there to know what is working, what isn't. Okay, very, very critical. And you can pay for that information. You don't have to do direct discounting. So what we have to look in this case is that Colgate-Palmolive was predominantly using what we call an approach called pull because of all the heavy campaign and create awareness. I think they created 73% awareness, which was great, okay, to the consumer. But they missed something. They missed the push. So one of the things I look for in the case was a slide that talked about push and pull, all right? Because what you want to make sure is to make sure that you have that product flow, you have appropriate promotional flow that goes to the channel as well. So that's where end caps come and your coupons and all these things, because at the end of the day, you have to think about the archetype of the retailer and that as a customer that many of you missed at the end of the day. They're there to make money. They're there not to sit on your inventory. And your job as a partner is to be able to create the demand, create the incentives at the point of purchase and the point of differentiation to make a difference. It's not just about off invoice. Too lazy to do that. So push is about aligning the incentives. So not this off invoice growth. In fact, I'm taking it from Colgate-Palmolive. They say sales targets achieving with retailers, okay, guaranteeing, purchases through sales contracts, okay, incentivizing distributors, then we have gifts and coupons, and then we have, I think, also things that we do with our customers. That's straight out of their playbook. But there are other things that you have incentives. We talked about data. We talked about end caps you can pay for. You talk about in-store promotions, in-store coupons only, okay? And then you can have in terms of specific price levels that you would hit based on volume. All right, so that's about incentivizing. So we're creating win-win. And what I was disappointed was I didn't see that. Okay, everybody pivoted back to gross discount off invoice. So, ugh, what an ugly slide. Yes, I do have to say, Chris Carr is rolling in his grave. But then, there's the good old funnel. All right, we talk about the funnel. And why do I put these things in blue, green, blue again, and then in orange? Because it ties to where tactics tie to funnel. We talked about this. To create awareness, you might have Celine Dion appearances. We may be having magazines that are there. We know that awareness has about 73%, so we're getting people there in the first part of the funnel. But how do we convert people across that customer journey down to purchase? Okay, and that's where coupons and point-to-purchase incentives, and then having placement in spas, TV ads with targeted shows and product placement, and then even our social media can come into play to be able to support from interest when you're considering various options for your beauty bar versus your skin category, to consideration, which is where you may test it out and find out if it works for you, to ultimately a longer term purchase, to then keeping and becoming a loyalist. And then you can keep them by having user points, online girl club and beauty club, which I think is very thing. Okay? Because, what I found in the case is there was no truly defined mechanism for the brand to keep and develop an active and passive loyalists as per McKinsey. And that social spots, with beauty emphasis, not product emphasis, but beauty emphasis are key. Make it about your customers. They want to come back and revisit you. It's very key in social, both in keep, but also in terms of interest. And then grow. I think that one good example was in terms of going to lotion, but brand extensions and refer a friend program. Considering giving to these brands with these. Okay? Ugly slide, I admit it, but I think I've got a few good points in terms of the key point here is to layer your tactics. And the last point here in the gray up top is the tactics need to be measured with metrics. The efficiency of how efficient you can turn a prospect into a customer is very critical. The cost to activate that customer going through that process is very critical. The lifetime value, it's not just conversion here, but how much they buy over their lifetime, another key. And then we talk about the purchase driver scorecard, which really looks at the funnel that's there. And then there was the issue about risks and mitigations. We had risks, but we need to be more specific with mitigations. So we need to define what a mitigation is and how we mitigate it, and then some specific. What I mean by specific is you're worried about fire, I have a fire extinguisher just in case. Or, you live in California, you have earthquake insurance. Or last but not least is you always have a plan B. I want to close this out with what every good marketer needs to keep in mind, which is that when you set up a plan, you implement a plan, you need to have mechanisms in place to track your plan. So, you need to track your progress through key performance indicators. That's what KPIs are. You will deal with this as a marketing manager. You will deal with this in both your performance objectives, but also your product objectives that are there. So, Tom Peters, which talked about in his book, and he was a McKinsey consultant, talked about in search of excellence, what gets measured gets done. So what we need to do is think about our funnel again and what is being measured. Not only efficiency in terms of activation, lifetime value, and purchase driver, but at the end of the day is how do we tie some of these metrics to actual financials in terms of the income statement. Okay, so that's my debrief here. I certainly hope you enjoyed it, got some pearls. Hopefully the insights that are gained here you can apply directly to the client cases that we have moving forward. But hopefully we can bring Cleopatra to a wrap. She can rest in peace. We can look back fondly in terms of this experience and feel that we have learned strategy. And with good strategy, we can be able to effectively make recommendations to determine, one, do we play in the market? And if we do play in the market, how do we segment? Who do we target? All right, so who do we target? How do we target? What is the story and relationship? How do we brand? So we build that brand against that target. And then at the end of the day is, how do we create a push and pull type of relationship as we think about not just the end user in our targeting, being the customer, but also the distributor and wholesaler and the retailer. Okay, everybody, have a great evening. I certainly hope this helped. I'm pleased to say that the grades were improved, and I will be adding some additional points for your hard work that you did during midterms for my additional assignments. So I don't let those things go by. And as you know, if you do and go beyond, then what happens is you get rewarded. Thank you very much, and have a great evening.